Hello and welcome to Session 6. I've put some fairly comprehensive notes for Session 6, which I'm not going to go through in detail in this call, but obviously you can go and have a look for yourself. But what I'm going to be looking at is two things. First of all, how to upload photos to your application, and secondly, how to secure the cargo deployer. Two separate but important aspects of what we need to do to make sure the thing works the way it should. So let me show you the application so you can see the thing running. This is the updated Spring Boot Leaflet Starter, which is the little map application. I have also updated in a similar way the user application. In the case of of this map application, I've updated it to allow you to attach a map, a photograph to the map, or to the map point at least. In the user application, I've updated it to allow you to attach a user photograph to the user account. But both of these use exactly the same way of doing it, and you can choose to use any of the code that is useful to you. So let me show you the thing working. Localhost 8080. And obviously this is the map we saw. You can see now I've got a few extra links at the top here. The map one basically comes here, but then the point list one lists the points that you have, and you can add a point to this. So just give it a name. Doesn't matter what it is, and create the point, and it will obviously create the point. Now you can also modify the points, and in that case you can actually add a photograph. So if I want to browse, I'm just going to pick a random photograph and open that, and then I'm going to update the photo, and you can see whatever my random photograph is shown up here. And that's really all that it does. If I go back to the point list, you'll just see a link to the ping here, but you can't see the photograph on this page. So I've done some simple CRUD operations, create, delete, update, for the map points themselves, and I've added in this ability to include a link. Now, if I actually just show you the map point object, and we look at the code associated with that, what you'll see is very simply I have added in this photo URL link, which is just a string, okay, and that is what is used to actually render up the photo. Now the way in which that actually works is that within Spring, if within an MVC config you actually extend resource handler, you can create a directory called user photos in this case, and then you can link that to a file. Now the file itself is specified here, file upload path, and the upload path is coming from either a system property or an environment property, which we will set up as the application starts. So you know what this is doing is linking that directory to that specific file that has been uploaded, and it just renders up that. So if I showed you the actual web page, if I go back to the modify point and I showed you the code for that under page source, if we go down to the bottom, you can see that here it is. Okay, we've got an input of type file. That's what causes us to be able to select the files using the select. It's going to be called image, and it's going to be either a JPEG or a PNG. And if I was running in a phone, possibly it could be captured by camera. I haven't tested this, but that's the way you would do it. And we basically give it the point ID, and the action update photo, and when we do submit, it will submit that up into our app. And you can see here that the image source, whenever we show the image source, is the user photos, and then the 5 is actually coming from the number of the point, and then the actual photograph name is here, and we've got some alternate text here as well. But that's how it's actually being rendered up, and it's being rendered up from that directory. So if I just click on that, you can see that's the picture that's coming out of the Jetty container. Okay, so how do we upload to the Jetty container? Well, obviously we've got this form action and it's view modify point. So let's look at the controller. So the MVC config here is just allowing us to get a directory that's got all our photos in it. But the page controller is where the work is actually being done for this. And we can see that we've got this file upload DAO that we're referencing. But we also have, right down at the bottom of the controller, this extra stuff for actually handling the update point. So if update point photo equals action, then we basically hunt around to find the ID of the point if it exists, and then we basically get the old file name from the point, which allows us to delete the file that we previously had. Otherwise we'll have an ever increasing list of files, but we only ever can reference one. So we delete the old file, and then we basically put into the map point that old file, delete it, and then we update it using this map point DAO to update the file. So that's what's going on, and we just go back to the point list. So you know, it's relatively simple. If we look at this file upload DAO that we're using, that is getting those properties, as I said, and it's using this multi-part get input stream to allow us to use that multi-part file. So in the controller, if I go back to that, you'll see that in this method we actually have a parameter called image, which is a multi-part file, and then the actual file upload DAO uses that multi-part file to actually get the name of the file and also to get an input stream, which it loads the file up in and puts it in the file path. Okay, where is everything being stored? Well, that's all being set by if you're running in Docker Compose, if you're running in Spring Boot, then if I go right down to the Spring Boot plugin, you can see that this environment property here goes to target archive files. So if I'm running as I am here using Spring Boot, then it's going to that archive files directory, and if I look in my target, you can see, hopefully, that archive file is there, and that is the photo that has been uploaded. So it's been uploaded obviously into a directory that is cleaned every time we restart the application here. What do we do in the case of Jetty? Well, the thing is that what we actually want to do in the case of Jetty is that we want to upload it to a known location that's going to persist across the start of the containers. And to do that, we need to have an environment variable that's set within the container that allows us to know where to put that. So how do we do that? Well, there's a few things going on. So if I just shut this down and start it up using Jetty instead, and I'm going to use this Docker Compose deploy example, so I'll show you the deployment stuff at the same time. Okay, so this is going to spin up the application, pretty much as we've always done it. Now, so the security that I've added in, if I open a browser and look at that localhost 8080 and click on the remote deployer, because I've already got the password set up in this browser, it's going to be quite happy, okay? But that's just the caching of it. But normally what would happen is that there would be, let me open it in another browser and we'll see if we get the desired effect. Yeah, there we go. So we get this username and password being asked for before we can actually deploy anything or before we can see that application. And that's the security stuff that I've added in. All right, let me just put in the actual security. So in this case, some username and some password. And you can see we're actually now coming back to the Jetty cargo deployer, which is what we would expect. So anyway, I need to deploy my application, and you can see that in my cargo plugin I've actually got the username and password. I'll tell you in a minute where that all comes from, but I'm going to actually just do the Jetty deploy, which we did previously. So let me go back to the directory and open another command shell, and I'm going to do maven cargo deploy. And it's now actually deploying to the application, and we should see, with any luck, the application coming up. There we are. We can see it is actually spinning up here, but the deploy hasn't finished. So it should come back. Right, the deploy is now finished. And if we reload, we'll see that it is actually up and running, which is fine. So the password that I've set only applies to the deployer. Okay, which means that you can only deploy a VOR to this app server if you've got the username and password, but the security for the actual application that you run, that's separate and within the application itself. We talked about that separately. Okay, so let me go back then and look at how all of this works from a Docker Compose perspective. And if we look at the actual Docker Compose files, we can see that in this Docker Compose deploy password, there are a few extra variables that have been added in to make this work. So the first thing is I've added these volumes. Now, from a Docker perspective, a volume is like adding a disk, basically. And I've said that the Jetty files volume is going to be mapped to Jetty files, which is actually at the root of the container. And then the logs are also mapped to another location. That's just so you can actually see the logs externally, but there's no particular value to that. The main thing I'm really talking about here is those Jetty files being mapped here. And then the other thing that's being done is that I'm actually setting properties in the Jetty container itself. So if you look at the Jetty container, we are actually injecting this rest simulator.ini into the start.d folder, start.d, and that particular file, if we look at that, is here. And that tells us what the upload path is. So that is setting the system variable in Jetty, which is picked up by our file upload DIO. You can see here I'm picking up either the environment property, which would come from when we're running it as Spring Boot, but if I'm running it within the container, then I'm getting that system property, and that system property is actually coming from this particular file, which has been injected into the start.d directory. Okay, so that's how that's working. Now there is another little twist to this, which is that unfortunately when you inject something in this way, and you can see here, you know, I'm injecting these files, Docker Compose is going to inject that folder as root privileges, and that's no use to us because Jetty is running as the Jetty user, and the Jetty user can't access root files. So in order for Jetty to be able to access this, we have to change the permissions of the folder which is being injected, and we can only do that in the build file. So what we actually have here is a build file, the Docker file, which, as you can see here, creates that folder at the root, data Jetty files, and then changes the ownership to Jetty, and it does the same thing for the logs, the Jetty target file. It's doing the same thing, but basically what it's doing is it's making sure that that folder already exists, and then whenever we inject extra data on top of that folder, it will always be injected and maintained using the Jetty user password and username rather than using the root user. So that's important to do, and that's the other thing. So two things we've injected. We've injected this Jetty data files into the container, and then we've injected this rest simulator.ini. You could call that file anything you want, .ini, but it's important that what it contains is the -d image file upload path, which is setting the system variable to say where that's got to go. Great. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about then was the passwords, and that's been set down here, and we can see that I've modified the web.xml, the Jetty web.xml, and I've also included this file called realm.properties. So if we look at the realm.properties file, first of all, under again, it's in this container file system folder under web apps. Actually under etc. Realm.properties just contains some username, some password, and then it's associating it with manager privileges. So that's what's going to set up your username and password. Obviously when you're deploying this stuff for real, you will change the username and password, and what you might also want to think about is not checking in code that's got this in it, because you don't want your code that's in GitHub to actually have your username and password, because that would defeat all points of security. You can use variable substitution here, and again I'll let you work out how that's done, but basically it allows you to have a vault or some way of setting the password elsewhere that will be picked up in this file whenever the file is actually used or injected into the container. These other two files are basically just what's necessary to allow us to enable the security, and again, you know, look at the tutorial. It will explain how this is set up, but you know, you don't need to change any of this. It's basically how security is set up for Cargo, and again, if you go to the documentation, which I've linked to in my markdown, it will tell you what this does, but you need to inject these as well. So what we're doing is we're injecting this Jetty web and this rest simulator.ini and the realm.properties into the container, and then that allows the container to know where it's going to save the files and to know what the username and password are for the deployer. Great. I think that I have covered everything I need to for this lesson. So again, you know, please spin up the app, have a look at it, have a think about it, and see whether there's any code here that you can use. I will say that I've done this just as a web page. I've not done it as a REST API yet. So you might want to think about that. What you really want to be thinking about is how is your application going to be uploading the points associated with the map points you're going to have. But you know, I've done a fair amount of the work here. Hopefully you can get the thing running and life will be good. So I'll see you in class. Cheers. Thank you very much. Bye.